What happens when the man who forces you into marriage turns out to be the only person who truly understands you? Stay until the very end, because this tale might completely transform how you view love. And if these emotional stories resonate with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Let's dive in. The rich scent of cedar wood drifted through the shadowy hallways of Blackridge Manor like a haunting melody. Deep within this hilltop fortress, surrounded by crystal chandeliers that sparkled with icy detachment, I found myself standing there. At 24, wrapped in white silk that felt more like chains than fabric, I faced the enormous ballroom stretching endlessly before me, filled with unfamiliar faces who barely acknowledged my presence. Their attention wasn't on me, it was reserved for him, Damien Cross, the man who had constructed a business empire so enormous it overshadowed every transaction. In New England, the man who would claim me as his bride tonight, not from affection, not even from passion, but from necessity, a deal sealed by my father's financial collapse. I gripped the bouquet more firmly, the stems pressing into my skin as I dared to raise my gaze toward his position. Damien Cross, 38 years old, imposing in his dark charcoal suit, and more frigid than the harsh Vermont winter pressing against the manor's stone exterior. His expression was set like carved stone, his black hair perfectly styled without a strand misplaced. He never glanced my way, not even once. His attention remained fixed on the efficient, his face unreadable, resembling a businessman finalizing a contract rather than a groom pledging his life. I forced myself to swallow, my mouth parched as the ceremony commenced. The words seemed to float around me, hollow and distant. In sickness and in health. Health? What about a stranger's promises? A destiny that wasn't mine to choose. I looked toward the audience. Polished expressions, artificial smiles, all pretending not to notice my rigid posture or how Damien maintained his distance. When the priest posed the crucial question, the atmosphere seemed to freeze. Do you, Damien Cross, take Isabel Moore as your lawfully wedded wife? The silence was overwhelming. For a brief moment, I hoped he might decline, that he might turn away and free me from this golden prison. But his voice sliced through the quiet like a knife, I do. 2 simple words, cold and mechanical, nothing beyond duty's execution. Then came my moment. I attempted to speak, but the words caught in my throat. My legs felt weak under the burden of everything I was surrendering, my independence, my self-respect, my heart. I thought about my father lying in that hospital bed, weak and crushed by debt. I remembered my mother, taken too early, her gentle lessons about loyalty and honor echoing in my memory. I do, I whispered, my voice nearly inaudible. The priest declared us married. There was no kiss, no gentle gesture of comfort, only the quiet scratch of pen on paper as Damien signed our marriage certificate like completing a business merger. The moment the ink was dry, he turned away, already disappearing into the manor's shadows that my heart ached. I stood there, abandoned in that sea of glittering lights and polished marble, the weight of my decision crushing me like a boulder. Later, that evening, I discovered myself in an unfamiliar guest wing. A vast bedroom, too spacious for one person, too cold to call home. My suitcase, small, weathered, painfully out of place, sat on the edge of the velvet chaise. I collapsed beside it, my fingers trailing over the worn leather strap. Something shifted inside a loose flap, slightly damaged. I slipped my hand through, expecting nothing, but felt the corner of something soft and aged. A letter, the paper trembled in my grasp as I opened it. The handwriting, small and delicate, struck me like a whisper from beyond. If you ever discover something worthy of forgiveness, cherish it. My mother's voice seemed to fill the space, embracing me like the lavender-scented shawl she wore while singing to me in our tiny kitchen at home. I pressed the letter against my chest, fighting back the tears I'd held in all day. Was this marriage something deserving forgiveness? Could I ever see beyond the coldness, the transaction, the fact that I had been purchased like merchandise? I walked to the window overlooking the darkened gardens below. The balcony stretched beyond, bathed in pale moonlight. I could almost hear the wind beckoning me outside to stand on that edge and feel something, anything, that reminded me I was still alive. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Instead, I pressed my forehead against the glass, clutching the letter, letting the pain in. My chest flew out in silent tears. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning of a battle I wasn't prepared to fight, a battle between obligation and longing, between what I owed and what I yearned for. And standing on the opposite side of that battlefield was Damien Cross, the man who had just become my husband. I closed my eyes, repeating the words again, as if they might anchor me through the storm ahead. If you ever discover something worthy of forgiveness, I didn't know yet if I had, but I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. I woke the following morning in a bed that felt far too grand for someone who hadn't slept a single hour. The silk sheets were tangled around my legs, but no warmth remained in them. The space beside me was untouched, empty, like the promises we'd exchanged the previous night. Damien Cross hadn't come to claim his bride. Part of me should have felt relief. But what I experienced instead was annoying emptiness, like standing at a cliff's edge. Uncertain whether I wanted to fall or if I already had, I rose quietly, wrapping my shawl around my shoulders, the one my mother had knitted during her final months when her hands shook so severely she dropped stitches. I never repaired those stitches. Somehow, their imperfections felt more genuine than anything else I possessed. After washing and dressing, I wandered through the manor's silent corridors, my footsteps muffled by thick carpets. No one acknowledged me. I wasn't certain if they even knew who I was or cared. The staff moved like phantoms, avoiding eye contact as though I carried some invisible mark of disgrace. Didn't know where I was heading until I found myself outside the garage, my heart racing. The car was waiting. I had called ahead. I didn't belong in this cool mansion. Not when my father was lying in a sterile room in a small-town care facility an hour away, alone and probably wondering if I had survived the night. The drive passed in silence, save for the hum of tires on wet asphalt. I stared out the window, tracing the outlines of trees blurred by mist. When we arrived, I stepped out quickly, my breath catching at the familiar sight of the brick building where my father had been residing since his health collapsed along. With his company, room 206, I knew the route by heart. When I entered, my heart sank. He appeared smaller than I remembered, frail against the white sheets, his skin pale and thin. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of the door, and when he saw me, he tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. Belle. His voice cracked like dry leaves underfoot. You shouldn't be here today. I crossed the room quickly, sitting beside him, taking his cool, veined hand in mine. Where else would I be? His eyes glistened with something I couldn't identify. Guilt, relief, perhaps both. You're a married woman now, he whispered, his throat tight. You have a new life. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Do I? He winced, closing his eyes as if my words struck deeper than they should have. I looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the weak hum of the heater, the small bouquet of wildflowers I had left on the windowsill days ago, now wilting. How are you paying for this place, Dad? I asked softly, brushing my thumb over his knuckles. I know the company is gone, and I know the debt didn't just vanish. His lips parted as if to answer, but something in his expression shifted hesitation. Fear. He turned his head away. You shouldn't worry about that. But I did worry. I always had. I pressed again, leaning closer. Tell me the truth. His mouth trembled, but the words never came. He simply squeezed my hand and whispered, "Forgive me." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. Later that afternoon, I returned to Blackridge, clutching my mother's shawl tighter as I climbed the marble stairs toward the east wing. I had seen no sign of Damien all day. Perhaps he had left the manor, or perhaps he was still here. Hiding behind walls, I couldn't yet penetrate Dot as I reached the landing. I heard muted voices, my name mentioned. I froze, pressing myself against the wall just out of sight. "The payments have been made on time every month," a woman's voice said, clipped and professional. "The care facility confirmed receipt again this morning. And the flower shop?" "Damien's." Voice deep, low, and unmistakably his Dot my breath caught. "Yes, sir. The taxes and outstanding lease have all been covered." "Good." A pause. "Make sure she doesn't know." "Yes, Mr. Cross." My knees nearly gave out. It was him. It had been him all along. He had been paying for my father's care, for my flower shop, before the wedding, before I ever agreed to wear his ring. Why? I stumbled back down the stairs, my pulse racing. I didn't stop until I reached the small reading room tucked near the back of the manor, the one no one ever seemed to use. I collapsed onto the leather armchair by the window, pressing my hand over my racing heart. He had let me believe I was. Nothing but a transaction, a burden. Yet behind closed doors, he had been quietly protecting the very things I loved most. I stared out the window down at the balcony below, the same balcony where I'd stood the night before, clutching my mother's letter, wondering if anything in this marriage was worth forgiving Dot. My fingers trembled as I reached into my pocket, unfolding the worn paper again. "If you ever discover something worthy of forgiveness, cherish it." Was this it? Was this the beginning of something more? I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time since I walked down that aisle, I wanted to know. I avoided him for days after overhearing that conversation. I told myself I was being cautious, that I needed time to understand his motives. But the truth was far simpler. I was afraid that if I confronted him, I might find myself unraveling faster than I was ready for Dot. The walls of Blackridge grew heavier by the day. Marble floors and high arched ceilings couldn't hide how empty the place felt. I wandered through silent halls, breathing in the faint scent of cedar that seemed to cling to everything in this house, including me, Dot, and yet I noticed things I hadn't before. The fresh flowers in every room, wildflowers, like the ones I used to pick with my mother in the meadow behind our house. The untouched tea set placed on the reading table each morning, Earl Grey with honey, the same way I used to make it for myself at the shop. He was watching me quietly from a distance. And still, I ran from every encounter until that night Dotted started like all the others, a dinner neither of us truly touched, followed by the soft clink of Damien's glass as he dismissed the staff with a nod. I sat at the far end of the table, picking at the hem of my dress, avoiding his eyes. When I finally stood to leave, his voice cut through the air like velvet steel. "Stay." I froze. Slowly, I turned to face him. He leaned back in his chair, jacket unbuttoned, the top of his shirt slightly loosened, as if even his perfectly sculpted control had grown tired. His dark eyes studied me, unreadable. "Why do you keep running from me, Isabel?" His voice was low, almost tired. I swallowed. "I'm not running. I'm surviving." He stood then, moving toward me with measured steps. My breath hitched, but I held my ground until he stopped a few feet away. "You think I don't see you watching me when you think I'm not looking?" His jaw clenched. "You think I don't feel you slipping away every chance you get?" I backed toward the French doors that led to the balcony, my pulse hammering in my throat. The cool night air rushed over my skin as I stepped outside, the marble beneath my bare feet freezing me in place. He followed. I stood at the edge, gripping the stone railing as if it might steady me. The moon hung low, painting the garden in pale silver. It was too quiet, too charged. "You want the truth?" I whispered, barely daring to look at him. He said nothing, but I felt him move closer. The heat of his presence wrapped around me like an unseen rope, pulling tighter with every breath. "I was terrified of you the day I said I do," I admitted, my voice trembling. "You were everything I feared, a man who could buy my life and never look back. A man who didn't even care to hold my hand." He flinched, just barely. I turned, forcing my eyes to meet his. "But you were there. You were there before the contract. You paid for my father's care. You saved the only piece of my life I thought I still had left my shop." "Why?" He took one slow step toward me, then another, until there was barely a breath between us. "Because I wanted to," he murmured. I shook my head, fighting the heat rising. In my chest. "No, that's not enough." "What do you want from me, Damien? Why bring me here? Why marry me if you don't even want me?" His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. He stood there, locked in some silent war with himself, until finally he exhaled like a dam breaking. "You think I don't want you?" His voice cracked quiet, rough but raw. "I have wanted you every damn day since I first saw you standing behind that flower shop counter, looking like you belonged to a world I could never touch." I sucked in a breath, stunned. My fingers tightened on the railing, unsure whether to hold on or let go. He took another step, closing the distance, his hand bracing on the stone beside my head. His breath mingled with mine, warm and uneven. "You don't see it, do you?" He whispered, his eyes dark with something I couldn't name. "I have built walls my whole life, and you?" He leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing mine. "You are the only one who makes me want to tear them down?" My breath hitched, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. His hand hovered near my face, hesitant, trembling like he wasn't sure if he had the right to touch me. "You said you were terrified," he whispered. "But the truth is, I'm the one who's terrified. Terrified you'll leave, that you'll take whatever this is and walk away just like everyone else has." I felt my chest cave in, the weight of his words crushing whatever distance still stood between us. My mother's words echoed in my mind, soft and haunting. "If you ever discover something worthy of forgiveness, ... I reached up slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. He flinched like my touch burned him, his breath shuddering. "Why would I leave?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "If you finally stopped pushing me away." His eyes closed for a moment, as if the ache of those words nearly undid him. And when he opened them again, I saw it, the fear, the longing, the man beneath. The mask. Without another word, his hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me gently, almost reverently toward him. His lips brushed mine, feather-light, hesitant, as if he was giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't. And when he kissed me again, firm, desperate, full of every unspoken word, I knew the walls had started to fall. I barely slept after. That night on the balcony, I lay awake for hours, tracing the memory of his whispered confession over and over in my mind. Every breath we had shared felt like a fragile thread, tying me to something I hadn't dared to hope for, something that scared me even more than the silence that had lived between us until now. He had let me in, just for a moment. And yet morning came like a cold wave, pushing me back to reality. I sat on the window seat in my bedroom, staring at the letter I had read a dozen times, but never fully opened. I knew every crease, every faded word. But there was something I had never dared to read past that one sentence. My mother's handwriting danced across the page, delicate and shaky in her final months. My throat tightened as I forced myself to read the rest. Forgiveness, my darling, is heavier than anger. I carried it for years, unsure if I had the right, but I hope one day you'll find the strength I never had. I was there the night your father signed the papers that ruined the Cross family. I begged him not to. I knew it was wrong, but I stood by and watched him take everything from them, thinking we'd finally have peace. Instead, it broke us. It broke him. If you ever face that family again, I pray you'll choose better than I did. My breath caught in my throat. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. It was true. Everything Damien had lost, everything he had carried on his shoulders, had started with my family, with my father. I pressed the letter to my chest, curling into myself as guilt churned through me like a storm. How could I stay? How could I pretend this marriage was anything more than another cruel chain binding him to the people who had already stolen so much from him? I had to tell him. The sun was dipping low by the time I gathered the courage to face him again. The manor felt heavier than usual, every step echoing louder than it should have as I made my way toward his study. The door was slightly ajar. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. His shoulders looked heavier tonight, as if the weight of his empire was finally pressing too hard. I took a deep breath and knocked gently. He turned, surprise flickering across his face when he saw me standing there. "Isabel," he said softly, as if tasting my name like a question. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. My hands trembled as I held out the letter. I need you to read this." He set the glass down, approaching me slowly, his brow furrowed, as he took the worn paper from my hands. I watched him read, every muscle in my body wound tight with dread. His jaw tensed, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the letter. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like gravel dragging across stone. "You knew?" I shook my head quickly, tears stinging my eyes. "I swear I didn't. Not until now. My mother, she hid it from me. She hid it from all of us." His chest rose and fell heavily as he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "All this time, I thought your family just walked away, untouched by what they did to mine. I felt like I couldn't breathe." I reached for him, but my hand stopped. "Midor, I didn't know, Damien, but you deserve better than this. You deserve more than a marriage built on debt and guilt." He turned, eyes blazing. "Is that what you think this is now? Just another debt to be paid?" I bit my lip, swallowing down the sob threatening to break loose. "Isn't it?" He closed the distance between us in 2 steps, his hands gripping my arms, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough that I couldn't turn away. "You think I would have let you into my home, into my life, if I didn't want you there?" His voice cracked. "I could have walked away, Isabel. I could have let your father rot in that hospital bed. I could have watched your shop close without lifting a finger. But I didn't, because you felt obligated. No." His voice broke, raw and desperate. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you suffering for his mistakes. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge and started being about you." My breath hitched. My knees threatened to buckle beneath the weight of his words. But I knew what I had to do. "I can't stay," I whispered, even though my heart screamed otherwise. "Not like this, not knowing I'm just another ghost of your past haunting you." He flinched as if I had struck him. "I'm letting you go," I whispered again, even though every word felt like it tore me in two. "It's the only way to set us both free." He released me like I had burned him, stepping back, his face crumbling in a way I had never seen before. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his voice hollow. "I won't stop you." And that was somehow the cruelest thing of all. I turned, walking toward the door on legs that barely held me up. My hand trembled on the handle. I forced myself to look back one last time. He stood there, holding my mother's letter in his hands like it weighed more than the empire he had built. And I left. I left him in that silent, empty house. I left him, even though every step felt like it might be my last breath, because I loved him enough to let him go. I wish I could say leaving felt like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like tearing out my own heart and leaving it behind on the marble floors of Blackridge Manor. The town I returned to wasn't the same as the one I had left. Or maybe it was me who had changed. My little flower shop sat quietly on the corner of Main Street, its windows dusty, the closed sign still hanging on the door. The once vibrant place where I used to fill vases with sunflowers and wild daisies now looked like a memory long forgotten. I stood in front of it for a long time, clutching my coat tighter around me as the cold Vermont air bit at my skin. A part of me wanted to unlock the door, to step inside and lose myself in the comfort of routine, but I didn't have the strength. Not yet. Instead, I walked the familiar path toward the care home where my father still lay, fighting a battle his body was too tired to win. The nurses smiled softly when they saw me. They didn't ask where I'd been. Maybe they already knew. Small towns have a way of knowing things before you're ready to admit them yourself. Room 206. I pushed the door, opened slowly. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the flickering fluorescent light. His breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of his chest a quiet battle. He turned his head toward me, his lips curling into the smallest of smiles. Belle. I rushed to his side, sinking onto the chair beside the bed. I took his frail hand in mine, pressing it to my cheek. "I'm here, Dad," I whispered. His eyes shimmered with something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Relief? Maybe both. I heard. "You left him," he rasped, barely more than a breath. I nodded, tears already burning in my throat. "You shouldn't have had to marry him to pay for my mistakes." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle like lead in my chest. "It wasn't just your mistake, Dad. We all carried it." He coughed softly, squeezing my hand with what little strength he had left. "Your mother, she tried to stop me. I should have listened." The words hung heavy between us, like smoke in a closed room. "I found her letter," I whispered. "I know the truth now." His hand trembled in mine. "I'm sorry, Belle. More than you'll ever know." I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his. "I forgive you, Dad. I already have." A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye. "Don't let this break you." I held him until the nurse came to check his vitals, until visiting hours ended, until the weight of the past felt just a little less heavy on my shoulders. I spent the next week tending to the shop. I cleaned the windows, arranged the shelves, and filled the air with the scent of lavender and rosemary, my mother's favorites. And every morning, without fail, a new bouquet of wildflowers arrived on the doorstep. No note, no signature, but I knew. I knew they were from him. One morning, I found a small envelope tucked beneath the bouquet. My heart pounded as I unfolded the paper, expecting some grand declaration, some plea for me to come back, but there were only 4 words. "The shop is yours." I sank to the floor right there on the front steps, clutching the note to my chest as tears spilled down my cheeks. He had let me go, but even in letting me go, he had given me back the one thing I thought I'd lost myself. Days blurred into weeks. The shop slowly came back to life, each new customer a reminder that I could still build something of my own, even from the ashes, but the ache in my chest never fully left. Not when I stood behind the counter, running my fingers over the petals of fresh daisies. Not when I locked up at night, staring out into the empty street, wishing for just one more glimpse of him. Not when I sat by my father's bedside, watching the man who had once been my hero slowly slip away. The night my father passed, I held his hand until his last breath. I whispered all the things I never had the courage to say before, that I forgave him, that I loved him, that I would carry our family's honor forward in my own way. And when I walked out of that room for the last time, I knew what I had to do. Stood once again on the threshold of Blackridge Manor, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I had come to return his ring, and if I was honest with myself, to return something far heavier, the piece of my heart I had left behind. I didn't know what waited for me on the other side of those doors. But I knew this much: I wasn't running anymore, Dot. It had taken me days to find the strength to return to Blackridge Manor. Days filled with empty spaces and 2 quiet mornings. Days of wildflowers showing up at my doorstep, reminding me of everything I had tried and failed to leave behind. And now, standing in front of that heavy oak door again, I felt the familiar weight in my chest return. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I hadn't dared to let myself believe there was anything left to say, but I carried his ring in my coat pocket, clutched so tightly that the delicate metal had nearly left marks in my skin. I took a steadying breath and knocked. Dot. No one answered. Part of me considered leaving the ring on the doorstep and walking away for good, but something in me couldn't do it. Not like that, Dot, so I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The manor felt different, like the breath had been pulled from it. No staff, no clinking glasses or quiet footsteps down the hall. The air felt stale, still, like it hadn't been disturbed in days. Dot. Had he left? I moved through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. I found myself drawn toward the balcony, the place where so much had changed between us just nights ago. But when I reached the doors, they were closed. The garden beyond lay quiet under the heavy clouds of an oncoming storm. I swallowed back, the ache rising in my throat. Turning back toward the front door, my steps faltered as I passed the study. The door stood slightly ajar, and inside I saw the faintest flicker of light from the desk lamp. I pushed the door open slowly. He was there. Damien stood by the window, his back to me, shoulders hunched in a way I had never seen before. He looked tired, uncertain, as if the weight he carried had finally pressed him to the breaking point. I didn't speak. Not yet. I stepped closer, but before I could find the words, his voice broke the silence. "You came back," he whispered, like he didn't quite believe it himself. I swallowed hard. I shouldn't have left like I did. He turned then, slowly, like every movement cost him something. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight, but his eyes, those dark, tormented eyes, looked like they hadn't slept since the day I walked out. "You had every right to leave," he said quietly, his voice raw. "I gave you nothing worth staying for." I shook my head, my throat tightening. "That's not true." We stood there, the space between us feeling both impossible and fragile. "I came to return." "This," I whispered, pulling the ring from my pocket and holding it out to him. "But I couldn't do it." His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "Why?" I blinked back, the tears threatening to fall. "Because every morning since I left, you sent wildflowers to my shop. You saved it, Damien. You gave me back the only part of my life I thought was truly mine." He let out a shaky breath, raking a hand through his hair. "I didn't do it to buy you back." "I know," I whispered, "and that's what scares me the most." He took a step closer, then another, until he stood just inches away. His voice dropped to a broken whisper. "I've never known how to love someone without ruining them." I reached for him, my hand trembling as I touched his chest, right over the heart I knew he had tried to lock away. "You didn't ruin me," I whispered. "You saved me, even when I didn't want you to." His breath caught, his eyes darkening with something. I couldn't quite name fear, hope, both, but I wasn't done. There's something else you saved, Damien, I said softly. Something you didn't even know you were holding on to. He stared at me, searching my face as if the answer might already be written there. My family's honor, I whispered. You could have destroyed us. You could have exposed everything my father did, but you didn't. You let me walk away with my head held high. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. He closed his eyes, a pained breath escaping his lips. I couldn't hurt you, not even when I wanted to. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. Why? I asked softly. He opened his eyes, stepping even closer, his hand brushing against mine with a hesitation that nearly undid me. Because I love you, Isabel, he whispered, his voice breaking. I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I have hated myself for every minute I made you believe otherwise. My breath hitched, tears spilling down my cheeks before I could stop them. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. Really? Look at me. I never stopped loving you, I whispered, my voice trembling. I never even knew I had started until you let me go. His arms wrapped around me then, pulling me into him like he might fall apart if he let me go again. I buried my face in his chest, clutching him like I had been drowning, and he was the only thing keeping me afloat, Dot. We stood there for what felt like forever, holding on to something fragile and real, something we had both been too afraid to claim before. And when he finally pulled back, pressing his forehead to mine, I knew I had never truly left him. We had only just begun to find our way home. The next day dawned gray and restless. Heavy clouds pressed against the Vermont sky as if the weather itself held its breath. I spent the morning in the small reading room I had claimed as my own, my fingers absently tracing the rim of my teacup while the fire crackled softly in the hearth. Damien hadn't said much after last night. He hadn't needed to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and the way he had held me, like I was something fragile but worth holding on to, had filled every unspoken space between us, and yet neither of us had said what needed to be said, that this couldn't go on the way it had begun, that this marriage had to be more than debts and obligations if either of us was going to survive it. I set the cup down and stood, pacing toward the tall windows overlooking the gardens below. And then I saw it, Damien standing alone on the balcony, the place where everything had begun to shift. My heart ached at the sight of him, so still, so distant, as if the weight of the world had finally worn him thin. I don't know what gave me the courage, but I walked out the door, down the hall, each step heavier than the last, until I reached the glass doors that separated me from him. I paused, my hand trembling on the handle, and then I pushed it open. The wind caught my breath as I stepped out, the crisp air curling around me like invisible threads pulling me toward him. He didn't turn, didn't move. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't come to return the ring this time. His shoulders tensed, but he